All right. So hello, everyone. Good morning. Happy October. We'll get started with introductions. First of all, my name is Matthew. I'm an educator at the Tennessee State Museum. This is my friend and co-worker and resident fall enthusiast, Lauren. We are very excited to have you guys with us today for the kickoff of our virtual Haunted Museum 2020. And for those of you who haven't been to the museum much or at all, Haunted Museum is an event we do every year, usually the Saturday before Halloween in October, where we have storytelling, arts, crafts, get to show off some of our spookier artifacts. Unfortunately, this year, because of the COVID-19 pandemic, we will not be doing it in person at the museum, but this does not mean Haunted Museum is not happening. We are still bringing it to you virtually throughout the entire month of October. Every weekend, we've got an event going on, and we are getting kicked off this week, very excited, with our Mystery Artifacts, Halloween edition. So, what is Mystery Artifacts? Great question. Basically, for the past several months, Laura and I have searched the depths of our museum collection for exactly 3 artifacts.
High and low.
High and low. One, we do not think you will know what they are. We did not pick easy artifacts. There are no cannons, there are no paintings, there are no dresses in this collection. And more importantly, Lauren, as you know, these are all Halloween themed. So what you guys are going to do for the next 15 minutes with us is try to think and act like junior curators. Ask questions like, what are these artifacts made out of? Who might use them? What time period are they from? So hopefully, when we're done with this activity, 1, not only will you have a good idea of what these artifacts are, but 2, you will know what the Halloween connection is. So with that being said, Lauren, did I miss anything? Or are we ready to kick off Virtual Haunted Museum 2020?
I think we're ready to go.
All right, here we go. So I'll get started, and here is our first artifact. So there it is. You see right there in the middle. We've got a couple of questions on the left there for our junior curators just to start thinking about what it might be. So the first one is, what material is it made out of? And you can see it looks like we've actually got a couple materials here for this artifact. I do want to mention that styrofoam with the string you guys see in the middle, that is not going to be part of the actual artifact. That is something our curators use to help preserve it. But it does look like, Lauren, we've got 2 materials here. Those look like, I'd say, wooden handles on either side there, maybe used for a person. And in the middle, I don't know what that looks like to you, Lauren, but to me, it almost looks like screws or bolts that have little knives on them, like it's almost used for cutting.
Yeah, it kind of looks like the Play-Doh cutters, that have the plastic end and you can roll over it. It looks like it kind of has a wavy edge there to it. And it definitely looks like someone would use this as handheld.
Yeah, so that's interesting right there. So handheld helps us because that makes us think that this is something that a person might use. So this is something that is handheld. So who would use this? Well, that's a good question. Honestly, this looks like something that could be used in a factory. It could be used at home. Based off of what we can see from just looking at it, other than it being handheld and made out of metal and wood, I don't know who might use this, but I think cutting is a pretty good guess for its purpose. Do you have anything else to add for our first artifact here, Lauren?
Well, I do want to put out to anyone watching that this is an entirely G-rated program. So even though they are all Halloween themed, and Matthew just said it may have something to do with cutting something, it is a very appropriate program. But I do think that's something important to keep in mind for everyone watching, trying to figure out what is this and how would this be related to Halloween. I think that's important to think about for each of these. And this item is going to somehow be linked to our next item. Do we want to kick it over to the next item?
Yeah, I think we're ready to go. Let me go ahead and switch the screen, and I'm just going to move the chat box out of the way. So here we go. So this one, I'd say automatically right off the bat looks a bit more advanced than our first one. We've got a nice question there on the side. Does this look like something you would find in a factory, farm, or house? I'm going to say, for me personally, this looks like something out of a factory. It looks like a lot of metal. It even looks like it has some nice detail on it. It looks like there's a name or something written on the side here. And it's something I missed at first, but if we look really closely, if you guys can see my mouse, but it's in the middle, it almost looks like some really designed metal, not just a basic pattern, which makes me think, at least, Lauren, that this probably comes a little bit more recent in history. This might be late 1800s, early 1900s. And once again, it looks like it's used by hand. So that does kind of help us out. Both of these look like they're made to be used by a person. What do you think about this artifact?
Yeah, I think this one does look more mechanized. It looks like a machine, a piece of machinery. And it looks like this was probably made by a piece of machinery. It doesn't look like it was handmade. I do notice a crank there, so you're going to do something with that crank and most likely spin that pattern in the middle. I do notice some writing on there. And really, for our question, I think that you could maybe find this in a factory, farm, or house, depending on what it does. But it does look like it probably belongs from a factory.
Mm-hmm. Those are all points, Lauren, but I can't help but think for all our students watching, what do these two still have to do with Halloween? So we've got one thing that is a bit small. It looks like it's used for cutting. We've got a machine we might find in a factory that's handheld. I think that's still going to be pretty tough for the junior curators out there to try to guess what this has to do with Halloween. But
We
hopefully,
may need to go to the third one.
yes, and I'm going to let you take this one, Lauren. So if you want to go ahead, here is our third artifact.
Now, junior curators, this one actually looks the scariest of all.
It
You
does.
might have had a guess of what you thought it was, and now we've completely ruined it because this looks kind of terrifying. But there's a few things to notice about this. Thinking about our questions from before, what do we notice that it's made out of? Some of our new questions that we have, is there anything written on this artifact? And Matthew, I don't have mouse capabilities. So if you could show us, I do notice it looks like it says the person that it is made by on the handle. We also see the word scientific. So this
Which
is a
could mean a lot
really,
of stuff.
it's very smart, really good at the sciences. And what could that tell us about? Well, for me, if I'm a curator and I see who it's made by, that gives me a lot of information because now I can take that and I can research. I can see where this company was from, if it's a company, if it's a person from a certain area, we can look up where they were living and kind of figure out where this came from and the time period that it came from. Something I do notice is that it has a trigger that it looks like you would pull, and it looks like it is attached to a blade, maybe, that has one of those blade guards. What do you notice about it, Matthew?
Yeah, so I think all that is spot on. I think once again we've got a handheld machine. It looks like I think those are all three of them I would say have in common. It definitely looks like it's for cutting something. You know, I think of, and I don't know if any of our junior curators have seen it, but if you've ever seen maybe your teacher has one at school or your parents use one in their office, but they'll be used to cut like big pieces of cardboard or paper. That's what it looks like to me. It honestly just looks like it's for cutting something very
Oh, yeah.
large. The scientific, that could mean anything. I don't know. Is it from a lab? Is it from a hospital? Is it from a factory?
It
Science
means
covers
this
a lot of
piece of
stuff.
machinery is smart.
Yeah, yeah. Or maybe the machine itself is smart. But I'm going to be honest, Lauren. I think we've answered some good questions here. And just to help out our junior curators, I'm going to go to our next slide. I'm going to move the chat bubble just in case it's in the way. It looks like we've got 3 handheld artifacts, like we said, all use metal, all look like they're from a factory. But what do these artifacts all have in common to do with Halloween? I think we've asked good questions. We've thought like curators, you know, whenever they see an artifact they might never have seen. But what is the Halloween theme? Lauren, can you hit us with a drum roll, please? It is
I cut off too soon.
That's right. Candy. Now, what on earth do those 3 machines have to do with making candy? We'll get to that in just a second. But I do want to mention, you guys might notice that for all of these, you'll see, or most of them, Standard Candy Company, Nashville, Tennessee, written on the tins. And that is actually where a lot of the tools you guys just saw in the early 1900s were used to make candy. The Standard Candy Company, if you guys have never heard of it, early 1900s, founded by Mr. Campbell, they are the ones who invented the Goo Goo Cluster, which you guys can see in the top right-hand corner. And for anyone who's never had a Goo Goo Cluster, it is very much a combination candy bar. It's got chocolate, it's got marshmallow, it's got peanuts, and it's got all kinds of stuff in it, covered in chocolate. And it was invented by Mr. Campbell and some folks in his factory in the early 1900s. And they had a hard time coming up, Lauren, with what they were going to call this. They had no idea what the name was. And the story that's usually accepted is one day Mr. Campbell was riding to work on a trolley car, and a woman, a teacher who was with him, who knew him from their commute, knew Mr. Campbell had just had a baby, and said, "Why don't you call the new candy a goo goo, the noise a baby makes, because it'll be the first candy they ask for from birth." So that name stuck. As you know, Lauren, you can still buy Goo Goo Clusters today. They've got a shop in downtown Nashville. They sponsored the Grand Ole Opry for a while. So really a lot of Nashville history here with candy, and all the tools you guys just saw, which we'll get to in just a minute, were used by the Standard Candy Company to make and sell candy in the early 1900s. But Lauren, this does bring us to a quick question before we go to the big reveal of what these tools actually were. I've noticed you've got a big spooky theme going. You went much more all out than I did. I just have my orange shirt, but you've got the Hufflepuff robe, the witch's hat, the Grand Hall in the background there, Great Hall. Do you have a favorite Halloween candy? I mean, is it a Goo Goo Cluster? I've never gotten one of those actually for Halloween. Those are usually, you have to go for something special. But what do you have for your go-to Halloween candy?
Yeah, I have to be honest, it's not a Goo Goo Cluster. I have many allergies. Goo Goo, if you want to make a tree nut free version, I think that would be great. I think that my favorite Halloween candy that I have been known to get bags of to give out to trick-or-treaters and then keep for myself low key, it probably has to be a Reese's. Reese's?
Reese's. you went like ET there for a second. Yeah, I think Reese's. Yeah, no, I think that is definitely a good option. I will say my favorite, I don't know how popular it is, but Dots, Tootsie makes them, those little gumdrops. I know they're basically just sugar. Some people think they taste like wax.
Yeah, but they're great.
Yeah, that's fine. But that's definitely the candy that I will eat first. I will not share. And if I ever do buy a bag for trick-or-treaters, I never give those out because I am selfish, and they are by far and away my favorite candy.
Hey, something to look forward to, kids. One day you will buy candy to give out to trick-or-treaters, but really you just keep it for yourself, and it's awesome.
The many perks of being an adult, absolutely. Now, with that being said, I think, Lauren, we're ready to go to our next slide and start revealing
what these items even are.
Yeah, so Lauren, do you want to start with our first one here?
Sure. So the first artifact that we saw, the one that had the handles and the metal in the middle, this is a fudge knife. Now, the artifact that Matthew and I found is in our top left corner, but they still cut fudge in a similar way. If you go to a big fudge shop, they're probably going to use a piece of machinery. You're not going to have people doing it by hand. But if you do have people cut fudge by hand, it looks really similar to what we have over here in the right. And you can see that's not a whole lot different than our artifact that's from probably the early 1900s. It does the same kind of job. It's just a little easier. They've evolved the process over time. They figured out how to make it easier and to cut more pieces of fudge at a time than our handheld roller. Now, when you use one of those, it's going to turn into little fudge blocks like maybe you've had before. What is kind of interesting to think about is at one point in time, people didn't really know about germs. They didn't know how people would get sick. And so if you would go buy candy, candy would just be sitting in barrels, candy would just be sitting out on a counter, and they wouldn't be individually wrapped. So maybe when the fudge knife was used, that's handheld, that might have been just cutting fudge and putting them out on the counter for people to take. It would take too long, too many resources, be too expensive for them to wrap each piece of fudge before you bought it. And so they would put it in a box, or eventually they learned about germs and they wouldn't let people touch them and they started wrapping candy individually too. But can you imagine going trick-or-treating and people just dropping in pieces of chocolate, individual M&Ms that weren't wrapped, Matthew?
I would not be a fan of that. One of the things I was always taught was you got to make sure the candy is wrapped when you get it. So yeah, that might have been, good life lesson. That might have been, in the past, like you said, smaller companies might not be able to afford wrapping their candy like Hershey's or other ones did. So you would go to the store and, like you said, get them cut there. But no, now pretty much any candy bar you'll get, whether it's from a gas station, grocery store, you've got it wrapped. So yeah, just the way things have changed. But but I am a fudge fan, all kinds of fudge. So it was kind of interesting for us for me at least, to find out this was actually a really old fudge knife. But if you're ready, Lauren, I think we'll move on to the next one.
Let's get that next reveal.
Yes, the next reveal is the larger one we saw is a candy press. So that was the large sort of crank machine we saw, and I had to find a picture to kind of show what it does. You guys can see there on the bottom, but it was actually used to press patterns into candy. So this one almost looks like a gummy or a licorice. You can see it being sort of pressed into seashells, flowers, starfish. That's what this would have done. So you would have fed the candy, and it probably would have been warm, so you could have pressed it through this machine, cranked that handle there, and it would have pushed a pattern onto the candy. Now, you guys might remember we mentioned during the presentation there was some lettering on the side. We actually looked that up for you. It says Thomas Mills and Brother. So who is that? We looked it up. They are, and say this 10 times fast, a United States confectioners tool works founded in 1864, which is basically a really fancy way of saying we make machines that make candy. So if there are any young engineers out there, pun intended, sounds like a pretty sweet job. You can make tools for making candy. That sounds pretty cool. If anyone wants to be a confectioner or work in a tool works. But you can see here we've got a bill there on the right from 1874. So that's something a curator would do, right, Lauren? If they don't know who Thomas Mills and Brother are, if they don't know what that name is, they'll do research. They might go to the internet, they could go to the archives, they'll go wherever they can, and they will find that name, and it gives them a little bit more information. So this is actually a machine that was made by this company and then probably sold to the Standard Candy Company in the early 1900s, and then was used to press candy ever since. So just kind of some cool information we've got going on there. With that being said, we're ready for our last reveal, Lauren, and it was the knife which we thought was used for cutting, our scientific knife. And sure enough, it is a candy cutter. And according to some research we did, Lauren, and you'll remember this one is probably used for cutting peppermint sticks. You can see here the tin on the left, King Leo, they still sell those today, are large peppermint sticks, and they would have to cut those, like you said, Lauren, maybe in the shop or ahead of time for the customers, because as cool as it would be, nobody wants a 6-foot-long peppermint cane. It's just too long to move. So they would use this candy cutter to actually cut it into smaller bite-sized pieces and then sell it like that. So once again, like the fudge knife, this is something that you might have behind that counter or that's used to make the candy a little bit more sellable, put in the tins like we see up there, and given customers. Any thoughts on this one though, Lauren? Is this what you thought it was, the candy cutter, or did you have any other guesses?
I was pretty nervous about this one. But I feel like how they cut peppermint sticks now in smaller candy shops, if any of our friends have been to Gatlinburg and you've seen them make candy in some of the fudge shops, I've seen them make peppermint where they twist it together, and they use an item that looks pretty similar to this to cut candy or cut peppermint sticks now. So I think that this one is still probably the easiest way, or something very similar to this is still used today, which I think is really cool.
Yeah, and I think that shows too, Lauren, when we've kind of been talking about this, but all three of these artifacts are some form of technology, right? They make it easier for those confectioners or whoever's selling the candy to sell it, to produce it, to cut it. So like you said, Lauren, even if these are from the early 1900s, I mean, let's be honest, there's literally only so many ways to make a knife and cut something. So there's probably still similar tools like this that are being used, whether it's in a factory, a big factory like Hershey has, or maybe a smaller candy shop. But just something cool, and there it is. There's our Halloween theme, all connected with candy. And with that being said, Lauren, I'll head to our next slide. We have just wrapped up our first virtual Haunted Museum program of 2020. So thank you guys. Thank you so much for those of you who attended, whether it's watching the recording or however you could. We do want to let you know that this, once again, is not our only Haunted Museum event. We have something happening every weekend in October. Every Friday, if you check out our Junior Curators blog, we've got fun interactives Lauren's designed for you guys to try out, all fall themed, of course. And every Saturday moving forward, we are going to continue with Tennessee ghost stories and legends every Saturday at this time at 9 a.m. So next week, October 10th, I believe, we've got the Spirit of DeKalb County. I do want to say, though, if you can't make it live at Saturday at 9 a.m., which is totally understandable, these events are recorded, and they will be on the museum's website. So the best place for you guys to go for everything and anything Tennessee State Museum Haunted Museum related is tnmuseum.org. That's going to be our museum's website. So go to the TSM Kids page in the top corner, go to Virtual Haunted Museum, and that has the entire calendar there for you. Links to programs like the one Lauren and I just did. And of course, you can check out Facebook, Instagram, and other social media accounts that we have for more information. But Lauren, do you have anything to add? I think we've just wrapped up our first program. Anything else you'd like to say?
It's my favorite month. It's my favorite time of year, the most wonderful time of the year, you might say. And I'm excited to have kicked off Haunted Museum, and I'm excited for the rest of the month.
All right.
Thanks for hanging out.
Sounds good. Well, thanks, Lauren. I appreciate it. Guys, thank you again for joining us. Have a good day. Stay safe, and we'll talk to you guys later in October.
Happy Halloween.